to the president and what appears to be, once again, some wavering here on expanding background checks?
Of course. Well, it's not like the wavering is unexpected. All we ask is that if you don't agree with us, if you don't agree with our plan, then come up with your own bold plan. And so that's what we ask of all politicians, really.
Okay, here's my plan. Pass national reciprocity, eliminate gun-free zones, stop voting for politicians who only offer gun control as a solution, but do nothing to fix the socioeconomic conditions of urban communities where most of the violence is. Instead of spending millions to research gun violence stats, spend those millions to research and develop a solution to the mental health crisis in this country, and spend a large part of that research looking into what connection, if any, psychotropic medicines have to mass shootings. Provide time off for people to get firearms training, especially people living in lower economic communities since they tend to live in high crime areas. Teach firearm safety in all schools, have metal detectors at all public elementary, middle, and high schools, have some sort of armed guard at all public schools, and actually enforce the gun laws we already have. And lastly, actually include firearm owners and gun people in the national and local discussions about firearm policies.
David, in a nutshell here, tell us what your group is calling for in this new peace plan, as you guys are calling it.
Well, we're calling for a multitude of things, none of which could be fully covered in this interview, and that's why I would encourage people to go to marchforourlives.com to look at the plan.
So basically, their plan consists of every gun control measure pushed by every anti-gun politician for the last several decades. They want a national licensing scheme, a national gun registration, an assault weapons ban, standard capacity magazine ban, red flag laws, mandatory gun buyback, declare gun violence a national emergency, ability to sue gun companies for gun violence, investigate the NRA, appoint a national director of gun violence prevention, give $250 million annually to the CDC to fund research to tell us that guns are the problem, give more money to a bunch of programs that have great sounding names, but no one is sure exactly what they do, automatically register all eligible voters, and mail voter registration cards to all 18-year-olds. But the most messed up thing they're asking for is to overturn the Heller decision. A decision that literally says that there is an individual right to own a gun. They literally want to eliminate the individual right to own a firearm. Not a particular gun, but a gun, period.
If they want to, but the important thing to remember about this plan is it is an appropriate and bold response to the massive amount of gun deaths that we have on every single year in the United States right now. And it's not a plan that's looking to get Democrats or Republicans elected. It's looking to get Americans that are morally just leaders elected that care about people dying across the country on a daily basis, you know.
So basically, every politician that doesn't agree with you doesn't care about people dying. So the politicians that support the single-parent mother who carries a gun with 17 rounds in it doesn't care about people dying. The politician that supports the man who uses an AR-15 to save his life against multiple attackers doesn't care about people dying. So the politician who supports the woman being able to buy a gun immediately after her crazy ex-boyfriend threatens to kill her doesn't care about people dying. And the politicians who support the millions of people who use handguns, shotguns, and AR-15s to save their lives every year doesn't care about people dying. Could you imagine David Hogg walking into a surgery and telling the surgeon what to use to save the patient's life? No, you can't. So someone please explain to me why our media is constantly putting David Hogg up on national television to tell me and the rest of America what we can and can't use to protect our lives, especially considering that the police don't have a legal duty to protect us. But our media insists on putting David Hogg on national television to tell us we don't care about people dying because we want the most effective means possible to protect our lives.
We see all the mass shootings that happen on TV, but we don't see the everyday shootings that happen nearly as much. And we especially don't see the majority of gun deaths, which are suicides, predominantly in rural and suburban areas. And we never hear about the root causes of gun violence, which are injustice. And we hope that this plan can help address those things in the first place.
What about the president's assertion that so much of it goes back to mental illness as well?
I think it's important to remember that what is not going to get us out of this issue is stigmatizing mental health more. We need to realize that as Americans, that people that are mentally ill are significantly more likely to be the victims of gun violence rather than the perpetrators. We've seen a massive double-digit increase in gun suicides and overall suicides over the past decade, and only talking about mental health in instances where you're talking about the motivations behind someone committing something like a mass shooting is not going to help resolve the situation or help anyone in the United States.
I find it funny you want to talk about suicides now all of a sudden. Initially, y'all tried to hide the suicide numbers and gun death stats to make it seem like all gun deaths were all homicides. Then we called you out on it, and now you want to flip it and act like suicides are now part of the gun problem? But here's the irony. Over 60% of gun deaths are suicides, and a vast majority of gun suicides are done with handguns. So how is banning assault weapons going to stop suicide? And you need only one bullet to commit suicide, so how does banning standard capacity magazines stop suicide? There's nothing in this plan that will decrease suicide by gun because it would require either dealing with the mental health issues involved in suicides or banning all guns. But you do want to overturn the Heller decision, so banning all guns isn't out of the question for you now, is it? And as far as I'm concerned, taking my gun because Fred wants to kill himself with his gun is as socialist as you can get. So while we're at it, let's take away your cell phone and car because suicidal Fred can't stop texting and driving.
But on a personal level, how are both of you guys doing? How are you coping?
I think what we really need to think about isn't so much about how we're doing, but how are the people that are not currently on TV doing?
Honestly, I hate that these kids had to go through this. I remember the fear I had sitting in my high school class and hearing about Columbine. I was scared and worried that it would happen at my school, but I was also very ignorant to the issues of the day, especially about the gun debate. I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but I think the way the anti-gun politicians and media use these children's trauma as a shield of deflection against anyone trying to constructively critique their gun control plans is disgusting. David Hogg is 19. How is he leading a policy conversation about a right you say he's not mature enough to exercise? That's not to say his concern about gun violence are not valid. We all care about gun violence here. But how is he leading a national discussion about restricting a right you all say he's too immature to practice? They push these children into the media light of an adult conversation that should be handled and directed by adults, not children. However, we can't critique anything these children say from a policy standpoint because anything we say about their plan will be considered a personal attack on children because they went through something traumatic. And guess what? They did, which is why you don't place traumatized kids in the light of political public scrutiny. Y'all wouldn't let traumatized kids make decisions in your home, but we're gonna let them drive the restriction of our constitutional right?
How are there survivors that have to step over bloodstained sidewalks on a daily basis that don't get that recognition of the historical injustice that causes gun violence in so many communities across the United States? And that's what we hope to address in this plan. We hope to come up with community-based solutions, such as violence intervention programs, and creating federal funding for programs that address the root causes of gun violence, not just creating stronger gun laws and not just talking about mental health, but by talking about every single aspect of this issue as what it is, a public health issue that is not going to be solved by more mass incarceration, because we realize that if mass incarceration solved our issues, TYAH wouldn't be sitting here right now, and gun violence wouldn't be a problem when we have the highest prisoner population in the world.
Inner city gang violence makes a vast majority of gun deaths in this country, and almost 90% of the gun violence in the inner city is committed with handguns, while mass shootings that tend to happen in more affluent areas make up less than 1% of gun deaths in this country. Yet, when you look at this plan, 90% of it is highly targeted solutions for stopping mass shootings, and nothing concrete that deals with the violence in the inner city except empty platitudes of community solutions. Literally the exact same soft language used by politicians during election season to get the black inner city vote. And then after elections, they're nowhere to be found and the conditions remain the same. If saving lives was the real solution, the vast majority of these proposals would be about dealing with inner city violence that make up 80% of the gun deaths in this country and not mass shootings that make up less than 1% of gun deaths in this country. And let's not forget suicides that make up more than 60% of gun deaths in this country. But oh, I forgot. You don't want to talk about that because it will stigmatize mental illness. Much the same way you don't want to talk about putting metal detectors in schools because it would make it seem like the schools in the affluent areas of town are unsafe. Yet they've had them in the inner cities for decades. Yet it's the schools in the suburbs that are being shut up.
What I hope we can understand is that we need actual federal policy and a plan. Universal background checks is not enough, and we need to realize that what the framers did not intend the Second Amendment to be was an issue that ended up taking 40,000 American lives annually. And we need to realize that we need to properly interpret it, because up until DC versus Heller, the Second Amendment was not interpreted the way it is currently.
See, there he goes again, trying to hide the context. I'm going to keep breaking this number down until you all start to listen. Of that 40,000, over 60% are suicides, which can't be prevented with gun control unless you ban all guns and deal with the mental health issue. The real number of homicides is closer to 8 to 10,000, not 40,000. That's literally less than 1% of the US population being murdered by guns. Yet millions each year use guns to save their lives. If you ask me, that's exactly what the framers intended. You want to know what else they intended? They intended to have an armed population of people that didn't have to rely on the government to protect themselves and to be able to check that government if they ever became tyrannical. Can anyone say Hong Kong? Especially considering they just fought a revolutionary war against a tyrannical government using the guns that the government was trying to take away. You'd know that if your school was doing its job in teaching you proper history, instead of letting you out of school to march against a constitutional right. So I don't really blame you. I blame the adults who are hiding behind the trauma of these children like a human shield against valid critiques of their unconstitutional gun control policies. The goal of the anti-gun left is not to have an intellectual conversation. It's about getting people to make an emotional, misinformed decision based on the disinformation fed to them by our media and anti-gun politicians. They know nothing makes people more emotional than traumatized children. And this, David, is what the framers never intended. Right now, there's a culture war against the Second Amendment, which is why I need your help spreading our message to counter their message. You can do this by leaving a comment, sharing this video, and click the bell and subscribe button. Let my voice be your voice, and let them know you want to keep America tactical, because the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive. Also, if you're wondering where to purchase your state-specific Keep America Tactical shirt, click the link under the Keep America Tactical in the description section of this video.